Ra and John Coltrane were both influential jazz musicians who challenged racial and cultural categories through their music and philosophy. Ra's music was often described as celestial or space jazz, while Coltrane was a guiding force behind free jazz. Ra's music was known for its dark, kinetic sounds and often included chants about ancient Africa or the solar system. Coltrane was initially drawn to bebop and hard bop, but eventually became a major innovator of avant-garde jazz. Ra was interested in Egypt and its role in black culture, religious power, and identity. His music influenced many artists, including John Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, and Lonnie Liston Smith. Coltrane was influenced by Lester Young and Johnny Hodges. Avant-garde jazz, or free jazz as commonly known, could be the most theoretical and abstract sound in Western music. Developed by African-American virtuoso musicians, mostly on the sax, trumpet, piano, upright bass, and drums, it's hard to think of a denser and more austere, yet ultimately spiritually rewarding, listening experience. Stemming from the fast-moving bebop jazz of the 1940s and the driving, soulful hard bop jazz of the 1950s, avant-garde jazz came into full power during the countercultural flux of the 1960s, when the music seemed to show the raw emotions, violence, sadness, passion of the civil rights and anti-Vietnam experience. Although the free jazz movement largely petered out after the mid-1970s, the music still remains today as testament to a legion of brave, forward-thinking artists who placed creativity and expression above the lure of the almighty dollar. Chaotic and lyrical, free jazz resists conventions. The traditional musical cornerstones of melody, rhythm, and harmonic progression are largely abandoned and replaced by a radical approach free of the shackles of Western musical rules. Seeking new musical ways to express their own times, avant-garde jazz musicians looking for inspiration during the tumultuous 1960s concluded that a truly revolutionary jazz music demanded a fresh, explosive instrumental language based on shaping slabs of pure sound, instead of simply running the usual chord progressions. Composers and players like Pharoah Sanders, Ornette Coleman, Cecil Taylor, and Albert Ayler created solos and improvisations that could evoke devastating pain or ethereal beauty, often within the same freewheeling piece. Predictably, free jazz was attacked by many establishment critics at the time as anti-jazz played by militant con artists, and it generally sold slowly in the record stores. Even the bebop-era innovators like Charles Mingus, Dizzy Gillespie, and Miles Davis found the new thing to be musically offensive and loudly voiced their dislike, despite having been criticized during their own heyday 20 years earlier. The unpredictable and intense nature of avant-garde jazz is what helps it stay independent and prevents it from being taken over by the music industry, even today. This is also why it's one of the few genres that hasn't been fully influenced by pop culture. It's not an easy type of music for most people to understand or enjoy. Certainly the most famous name in avant-garde jazz is John Coltrane, who began his career in the late 1940s as a disciple of tenor titans Ben Webster and Coleman Hawkins. Coltrane first gained international superstar status in the acclaimed Miles Davis groups of the 1950s for his lengthy solos. He soon formed his own band and recorded dozens of modern jazz masterworks, including the classics My Favorite Things, Giant Steps, and A Love Supreme, among many others. But sometime around 1962 or 1963, Coltrane decided to turn his back on mainstream jazz, and he embarked upon an epic journey of musical exploration driven by a restless spiritual need. Coltrane regularly stretched his solos into 1 or 2 hour dissections of a singular theme, bending and twisting notes until they became their own musical universes. Perhaps somewhat amazingly, John Coltrane sold millions of records worldwide during and after his career. He is always rightfully credited with being the real spearhead of avant-garde jazz. But it is actually the little-known composer and pianist Ra, who is perhaps the true father of avant-garde jazz and the musician who served as a primal influence on John Coltrane's quest for a deeply expanded musical consciousness. It was Ra musicians, John Gilmore and Marshall Allen, who both often played in a freestyle as far back as 1955, that was similar to what Coltrane would later develop in the early 60s. On his many records and in live band performances, Sun Ra's musical approach frequently veered from vaguely straight-ahead bebop to Latin-tinged exotica to freeform meltdowns accompanied by eerie chants about the wonders of the solar system or ancient Africa. Throughout his peak 1960s albums like The Nubians of Plutonia, Pathways to Unknown Worlds, Crystal Spears, and The Bad and Beautiful, Sun Ra and the Arkestra created tangled sonic webs of improvisational genius. Dark, kinetic sounds bursting with spiky electric piano or fuzzy keyboard lines and horn freakouts that would likely send most punk rockers screaming from the room. Sun Ra was one of the first to privately press his own records independently. He released an astounding 200 or so albums during his lifetime, produced and distributed through his record company, Saturn Records, a practice which allowed him to survive outside the realm of the corporate music marketplace. Sun Ra's fixation with ancient Africa, extraterrestrials, Egyptology, planetary time travel, and all things metaphysical was sometimes perceived as a weird, out-there gimmick. In actuality, his galactic philosophy worked as an empowering belief system in which the struggles of Black people were to be rewarded by the cosmic freedom promised in the outer space of the future. Like Sun Ra, Coltrane was a musician with some similarities in ideology with members of the Black nationalist movement, though he never conformed to the central tenets of that movement. Instead, Coltrane positioned himself in universal terms, beyond the color line, drawing on the spirituality revealed to him following his religious awakening in 1957. After a period of alcohol and heroin abuse, Coltrane freed himself from the grips of addiction cold turkey, and, as revealed in the liner notes to his seminal album, A Love Supreme, he sought the strength of God to guide him in his quest to make others happy through music. Coltrane believed in the importance of discovering one's individual nature, free from cultural expectations and not shaped by the past. He emphasized humanity's potential for goodness, instead of falling into harmful racial categories that create division. Sun Ra, on the other hand, saw the entire planet affected by racism, which originated in biological definitions, but now fuels societal divisions. In a 1971 interview, Sun Ra explained that his music is inspired by being in tune with the universe, which he describes as outside the past, present, or future, calling it an alter destiny. Like Coltrane, Sun Ra saw the universe as a source of inspiration, free from the limitations of this world, including racial boundaries. By placing his music and ideas outside of time, Ra envisioned a new path for the world that is not shaped by its past or future. He then shifts the conversation from music to a broader concern, stating that he believes the planet is doomed, introducing a more existential tone to the discussion. Whatever was inspiring Coltrane, his free jazz experiments influenced many early psychedelic rock acts and artists. Jim Morrison and The Doors based the middle section of Light My Fire on Coltrane's My Favorite Things. The Byrds' iconic 8 Miles High also had Coltrane influences. The free and avant-garde jazz of Coltrane and musicians like Sun Ra could be found in many places in early rock. I'm not sure how many musicians today, especially rockers, go back and spin the records of Sun Ra and John Coltrane's electric freakouts. But every time you hear dashes of creative experimentation, cosmic consciousness in lyrics, and improvisational guitar solos, I'd argue some of this has been influenced by albums like A Love Supreme, even if the artists themselves don't know it. This is Aaron from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.